Bristle, the dog who walked alone. The dog came first, moving like wind-churned smoke along the ridge above the canyon flats. He was a lean, rough-coated cattle mutt, color of rotted wheat, a torn ear flapping with each step. His name was Bristle, though no one had called him that in years. The name had lingered longer than the men who gave it. His last master had died face down in a dry creek bed 2 winters past. Before that, he'd outlived another drunken cruel and long forgotten. Now Bristle belonged to no one and nothing. He trotted as though he had a destination, a calling buried in instinct or something older. His ribs showed beneath the dust-matted fur, the right side of his muzzle stained with dried blood from a fight with a fox the night before. That fight had earned him little more than a sore paw and a raw patch behind the eye. But he hadn't slowed. A ghost among the sage and rock, Bristle moved with a lean hunger of something that still remembered purpose, even if the world had forgotten to give him one. That morning, the wind shifted from the south, and Bristle stopped. His snout-lifted nostrils flared. A scent caught in the draft sharp and foreign. Not coyote, not cow, not man, not even fresh death. But it was blood old and iron-rich, and beneath that something else. Something human. Something stubborn. The kind of scent that clung not just to skin, but to memory. It stirred something deep in him, something not quite a thought, more like the echo of a campfire voice in the cold. Bristle angled down the slope, his ears flat-stepping with care over shale and loose stone. He followed that scent like it was tethered to something sacred, something that needed him. The girl in the dust. She lay in a drift of red dust where prairie gave way to shale. Her body slack, her arms flung wide like she had fallen from the clouds. Her dress faded, calico ripped and soaked with sweat, clung to her like a second skin. Dust crusted her cheek, and her lips were split and cracked, barely breathing. Blood stained the ground beneath her right hip, seeping from a wound that had soaked through a once white slip. There was no movement at first, not even the shallow rise of her chest. But Bristle, who had once guarded cattle and bitten rustlers' heels with the fury of 10 dogs, lowered his head and whimpered. He circled her, once frantic, pawing at the ground like he meant to dig something free. Then he nudged her shoulder gently with his nose. She stirred barely. A weak wheeze pushed past her lips, dry as brittle grass. Her left eye opened wide, the white of it showing all around the iris. Sunburnt freckles smeared her cheeks, and when she spoke it was a rasp. "Don't go. Don't leave me." Bristle didn't. He settled beside her ribs, pressing into the dirt, his nose against her hand. The sun burned higher in the sky, but he didn't move. When she drifted in and out of a half-sleep, the dog stayed breathing beside her like a sentinel carved from wind and dust. And when twilight painted the canyon in bruised gold and violet, Bristle rose and turned back toward the place he'd come from, the only place that might hold someone who would care enough to listen. Colt March, the man who'd forgotten words. Colt March didn't smile anymore. He hadn't in years, not since the war or the fire, or maybe before that. Folks around Dustbridge Canyon stopped speculating long ago. Some said he'd left something behind in the war. Others said it had been taken from him. He never corrected them. A tall man, broad-shouldered, with a ruined hand and a slow way of moving, Colt lived alone in a rustwood cabin past Deadman's Draw. Just him, the wind and Bristle, though the dog wandered more than stayed. Mornings were for coffee, evenings for whiskey. In between, he fed the chickens, fixed what broke, and let the world forget he was there. That evening, when Bristle came whining at the gate, Colt was already on the porch, nursing the day's silence. The dog's fur was ragged, eyes wide with urgency. He didn't bark. He just stared. Colt rose without a word, slung a rifle across his back, and followed. The air was heavy, storm brewing thick. Lightning forked once across the canyon's edge, casting long, flickering shadows. They reached her just after dusk under a bluff where the wind couldn't quite reach. Colt crouched beside her, brushed tangled hair from her face, and saw the blood deep but clean. A bullet graze. Her wrists were raw, her boots gone. A man's handprint bloomed purple across her cheek. He didn't speak. He only tore a strip from his shirt, pressed it to the wound, and lifted her in his arms as if she might break or vanish if he held her too tight. Bristle trotted ahead, his path certain. Behind them the canyon grew darker. The wind moaned across the flats like something mourning. But Colt March kept walking, carrying a stranger who already felt like something worth saving. Awakening to the quiet. It took 3 days before she woke fully. The fever had gripped her tightly, wringing her breath into shallow gasps, her body locked in a restless stupor. Colt kept her in the back room, cool, dark, quiet. He brought in broth when he had it, rainwater when he didn't. The bandage on her hip was changed twice a day, always gently, always without a word. The wound ran deep but hadn't festered. Her skin had grit but not sickness. That gave him hope, though he never called it that. He sat in the corner sometimes, whittling oak into shapes he never finished. Mostly, he kept to himself unless she stirred. On the 3rd morning, her eyes opened slow and cautious, blinking against the filtered light from the shutter. Her face was pale, freckled, and still bruised. She didn't cry out, didn't panic, just turned her head toward him like she'd sensed he was there all along. "My name's Myra," she rasped, voice like sandpaper dragged across stone. Colt looked up but didn't move. He was working on a latch hook for the barn door, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. Old burn scars and faded tattoos marked his arms, remnants of a younger man and a life most folks didn't ask about. He nodded. "Colt, you's the one that found me." "No," he said. "Dog did." Myra blinked slowly. Her lashes were crusted from sleep and dust. "Thought I was dead." "You almost were." She swallowed, throat raw. "How long, give or take?" He answered, and she didn't press further. He poured her a tin cup of water and passed it into her trembling hands. She looked down into it like it held something more than liquid, like it held memory or trust or proof that she was still breathing. "I can work," she said quietly, "when I'm better. Don't want to be no debt. You're not." Still her eyes stayed on him, wary. Not afraid, not yet, but alert the way cornered animals watch the sky. She drank slowly, like the act required permission. Colt didn't ask what happened. Not yet. He knew that story would come only when it was ready to bleed. The first night and the second truth. That night, the wind rose from the basin like it was trying to tear the world apart. It slammed into the shutters hard enough to crack the frame. Bristle paced the porch, hackles raised, ears alert. Inside, Colt sat at the table cleaning his rifle with a kind of methodical calm that comes from years of preparation. Myra stood barefoot near the hearth, wrapped in an old wool blanket, her shoulders rigid beneath the weight of everything unsaid. She hadn't spoken much all day, ate in silence, moved like a shadow, but now she turned toward him, voice brittle. "They thought I'd die out there." Colt looked up from the barrel. "Who?" She hesitated. 3 men, one called Danner. The others, I didn't know. He set the rifle down. "Why'd they leave you breathing?" I shot one, she said. Then I ran. The room was still. The fire popped once, casting gold across the walls. "I didn't mean to kill him," she added. "He grabbed me. Said I was promised." Colt's brow twitched. "Promised?" She nodded. "Bought, more like. But my stepfather traded me off. Settled his whiskey debt with a man named Danner. Runs land east of Cold Knife. They call it a ranch, but it ain't. It's a prison. For girls." "How long were you there?" 3 weeks, she said. "Long enough." Silence fell like ash. Bristle scratched once at the door, restless. Myra turned her face to the fire again, flames reflecting in her eyes. "I'd rather die on the prairie than go back." Colt stood slowly. He didn't speak right away. Then he said it not softly, but not cold either. "Just certain, you won't." That was the first promise. Spoken like a brand seared between them. Outside, the moon hung thin and distant. Inside, the fire burned low and the wind howled across the ridge. But nothing in the room moved, not the man, not the girl, and not the dog who sat sentry at the door. The morning after, at first light, the sky was the color of old bone. The prairie breathed shallow, reluctant to move. Myra stepped out of the cabin alone, her bare feet sinking into the cool dirt like she was anchoring herself to something real. She moved stiffly, favoring her side, but didn't wince. A bucket hung from her good hand. She scattered feed for the chickens in slow, practiced motions. Bristle trailed her like a silent shadow, never more than a few paces behind. Colt watched from the barnyard, arms folded the brim of his hat, pulled low. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Myra didn't look at him, but maybe she knew he was there, or maybe she didn't care. Her braid hung heavy down her back, damp from morning dew. She paused to kneel beside the lame hen, stroking its featherless crown before moving on. She hadn't asked for help. Not once. She didn't ask about where she was, or what Colt did, or what lay beyond the canyon. She didn't pry into the silence that wrapped around the house like a second skin. She just stayed. Quiet, cautious, wounded, but present. She cleaned her own bandages. She never asked for painkillers. She only cried once silently in the barn when she thought no one could hear. But Colt heard. One sob, sharp and sudden, like something catching on barbed wire. Then nothing. No sound after, just the rustle of hay and the creak of rafters. By the second week, she was standing straighter. Her color came back slowly. She helped peel potatoes in the kitchen, never flinching when Colt passed behind her. But still her eyes watched silence like it might betray her. If he sat too quiet for too long, she'd glance over her shoulder as if bracing for impact. She was learning peace, but only one moment at a time. Holler. The dog that meant more than blood. They were in the tack room one evening, mending worn leather and frayed reins under the hum of twilight. The air smelled of saddle soap, old dust and prairie grass, drying outside the open door. Myra sat across from Colt, a small pile of straps laid neatly on her lap. Her fingers moved with purpose, strong and steady, less tentative than they had been a week ago. "You ever have a dog?" Colt asked without looking up. Myra didn't answer at first. She set the leather aside, stared down at her raw palms, then gave a short nod. "Cattle mutt. Named Holler. What happened?" "P sold him," she said flatly. "Swapped him for a jug of corn liquor when I was 12. Colt looked up. Her voice hadn't cracked, but her jaw had tightened slightly. Bristle lay curled by the hearth, one ear flicking at invisible flies. He didn't stir. I liked that dog more than my brother, she added. More than Pa, too. Sometimes I think Holler was the only thing God ever gave me that was mine. Colt met her gaze. She didn't flinch this time. She held it. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked directly at him and didn't blink or look away. That was the first moment the silence between them shifted. It didn't break, not exactly, but it softened. It became a thing that held weight and meaning, not just absence. She set the knife down beside her, leaned back in her chair, and exhaled slowly. Outside, the prairie murmured with the quiet rustling of dry grass, and inside the tack room they let the night fall around them without any need to speak. The rider under the silver moon. 3 nights later, Colt was already awake when he heard the hoofbeats. He'd been sitting on the porch cleaning the barrel of his rifle with slow, meditative strokes. The night was dry, still, and heavy, the kind of night where the wind didn't dare breathe. He heard it before he saw its slow, deliberate hoofbeats cresting the ridge beyond the paddock. Not rushed, not sneaky, just bold. He set the rifle down and stepped off the porch, boots crunching against packed earth. The moon was full, casting a pale silver line across the field like a blade laid on velvet. A lone rider emerged from the tree line, pausing just long enough for the light to catch the edge of his coat. Then, as if satisfied, he turned and disappeared over the rise. Colt didn't follow. He just stood there, watching the place where the rider had been until the light shifted and the shadows swallowed everything. He didn't move again until the first bird called. In the morning, Myra stood by the gate. "They're looking," she said. Colt nodded once. "That wasn't a local." "No. You recognize him?" She didn't answer. Her face had gone pale, not with fear, but with something older. Something like readiness forged in fire. She didn't run. She didn't tremble. She only looked toward the horizon where the rider had gone. Colt studied her quietly. "I'll teach you to shoot," he said. She didn't nod, didn't thank him. She just went inside, fetched her coat, and came back with the sleeves rolled. The girl who didn't miss. The days turned harder after that. Not colder, just heavier, like something unseen had started watching the ranch from every shadow and tree line. Myra worked the land like she was trying to earn her place, like the act of surviving wasn't enough unless she contributed. She milked the goats, reset fence posts, knocked down by restless cattle, learned to ride bareback on Colt's stubborn gelding. And by the second week, she was reloading with speed and precision most men took months to master. She didn't need instruction twice. Colt never had to repeat a thing. She listened, learned, adapted, and remembered everything. By the end of the first month, she was shooting tin plates from 30 paces. Colt watched from the porch, arms crossed, never offering praise but never needing to. Myra didn't seek approval. She sought mastery. She cleaned the revolver better than Colt ever had. She walked the perimeter at dusk, eye sharp movements quiet. Bristle followed her now instead of leading. The girl who had once bled into the red dirt, who had begged a dog not to leave her alone under the canyon sun, was gone. What remained was something leaner, something sharper. Not harder exactly, just more honed. One night, Colt caught her out near the paddock, standing under a sky so black it looked wet. She held the rifle low, not aiming, just staring. "You waiting for them?" he asked, voice low. "No," she said. "I'm remembering." He didn't ask what. He didn't need to. The wind swept past them both, and for a moment the stars above blinked like the eyes of ghosts who'd seen too much. Winter settles. In winter came fast that year, the kind of cold that seeps into your marrow before you realize it's settled. Snow drifted down from the ridge long before the last leaves had a chance to fall. It coated the prairie in white hush and turned the pump handles brittle enough to crack. Colt patched the roof as best he could, nails clenched between his teeth, fingers stiff with cold. Myra split wood until her hands blistered. She didn't complain, only wrapped her palms in linen and kept working. They didn't talk much in those days, but the silence didn't feel hollow anymore. It was a silence that bore weight like saddle leather or wet wool, a silence of shared work, not shared pain. In the mornings, Myra patrolled the fence line with Bristle at her heel rifle slung over her shoulder. She moved with purpose, scanning the hills beyond the creek as if they might cough up ghosts at any moment. One night, after a long day of chopping and hauling, they sat near the stove, coals glowing orange and low. Myra spoke first, her voice soft and strange in the stillness. "When I was small, my mama told me a story." Colt glanced over from where he sat oiling the rifle. "Yeah," she said when she was near, drowned in the river as a girl a dog pulled her to the bank. Said it stood over her all night till someone came. Colt looked down at Bristle curled beside the stove, snoring soft. "You believe it?" he asked. "I do now." She reached down, fingers brushing Bristle's old head. The dog didn't move. "Maybe it's God's way," she said. "Not saving people, just sending dogs." Colt didn't answer. He stared into the fire for a long moment, jaw clenched tight. She stood then silent again and went to her room. He stayed by the stove until the coals turned black. The bottle and the brand. It was late January when the next rider came. He didn't stop at the gate. He didn't speak. He left behind a sign instead, a whiskey bottle, old and empty, hanging from a fence post by a strip of leather. Colt found it in the morning, crusted with frost. He pulled it down and took it inside. Myra was at the table, sharpening her knife sleeves rolled to the elbows. When she saw the bottle, her whole body went still. "That's Dana's brand," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it hit the room like thunder. "He the one that put the bullet in you?" Colt asked. She nodded. "He doesn't shoot to kill, not right away. He plays first." Colt stared at the leather, then tossed the bottle into the stove. It cracked as it hit the cast iron. The leather flared in a burst of orange and was gone. The glass glowed for a long time after. "What happens when he comes himself?" he asked. Myra looked at him, and for the first time something faltered in her eyes. Her hands trembled just once. "I don't know," she said, "but he'll try." Colt nodded. "Then we'll be ready." "Don't let him take me," she whispered. "I won't." He said it like an oath, low, steady, final, the kind of promise made not from hope but from something deeper. The firelight caught the edges of his face, and for a moment he looked carved from rock. Outside, the wind howled again, shaking the shutters. Bristle stirred in his sleep, a low growl in his throat. Inside, neither of them moved. Preparing for the storm. February turned the creeks to ice, and the trees along the ridge stood like bones jutting out of the snow. Myra took to wearing Colt's old sheepskin coat. It dragged behind her like a cloak, the hem stained with ash and frozen mud. She still limped slightly, but her eyes had changed. They were clearer, now sharper. The bruises on her cheek had faded to yellow smears, but her voice had grown steady. She spoke of distances, of angles between trees, of where to place traps and how to time the reloading of a rifle. They made plans without naming them as such. Reinforced barn doors, dug a cellar wide enough for two, filled it with biscuit and jerky and salt. Colt taught her how to reload in the dark by feel alone. She taught herself how to walk without sound. At night they took turns on watch. Bristle always stayed with her, curled at her side like a sentry carved of hide and loyalty. One morning, as the sky broke pink over the ridge, she said quietly, "What if he don't come for me? What if he just burns it all down?" "He won't," Colt said. "Why not? Danner likes to touch what he thinks is his." Her eyes narrowed. "I ain't his." "No," Colt said. "You're not." She looked at him for a long time, and then she nodded, small sure. Later, while cleaning her revolver, she whispered under her breath, "Not anymore." Colt heard her from the porch. He didn't speak. He only sat down, cleaned his shotgun, and watched the smoke rise from the chimney like the first breath before war. Smoke on the horizon. They saw the smoke 2 weeks later, thin as thread curling up from the far side of the southern ridge. It wasn't theirs. Colt spotted it, first standing on the rise above the pasture, with one boot planted on a flat stone rifle slung across his shoulder. Myra stood beside him, shielding her eyes against the white glare of morning snow. It wasn't close enough to be immediate, but it was too close to be ignored. "They'll scout first," Colt said, voice flat. Myra didn't answer. Her jaw tightened, her fingers brushing the scar just above her hip, old blood memory waking up like a ghost in her side. "Then they'll test," Colt continued. "He'll send the snatchers close, probably 3, maybe 4. The rest will hang back in the brush." Myra nodded slowly, face unreadable. "He'll want to take me breathing, not if you're aiming back." She didn't reply, but her eyes locked with his. That single moment of shared clarity said more than any war speech ever could. That night, Colt opened the chest beneath the floorboards, an old cedar box wrapped in oilcloth and time. Inside lay the relics of another life, a pair of long-barreled revolvers, a carbine with a scorched stock, a Confederate belt buckle dulled with rust and regret, and at the bottom a yellowed telegram with a name scratched out in haste and grief. He handed her one of the revolvers. "It's heavy," she said, running her thumb along the barrel like it might bite her. "You'll carry it anyway." She nodded and didn't put it down. The sound before the silent snow fell again on the third night after the smoke. Thick, wet flakes that muted the world, cloaking the land in a silence that made the teeth ache. Myra lay awake, rifle beside her on the cot, boots tucked beneath the bed for quick reach. Her hair was tied back with leather, and her eyes stared at the rafters like they held some hidden message. She dreamed of fire of dogs barking of hands around her throat. She woke to Bristle growling low from the kitchen. Not barking, not whining, just that soft, deep warning like thunder in a hollow log. She moved quickly, every step slow and silent across the cold floor. Pressed to the wall, listening, a breath, then another. Faint, but real. She turned into the hallway just as Colt appeared bare-chested despite the cold shotgun in hand. His eyes found hers, and they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Colt cracked the door open just enough to peer into the silver dark. A shape stood 10 yards off, unmoving, watching. Another farther back atop a horse. Myra lifted the rifle, her hand steady. The man nearest stepped forward. Tall, wearing a long duster slicked with frost. His beard was streaked with gray. His voice, when it came, was smooth as molasses and twice as slow. "Evening, friend." Colt didn't answer. The man raised his hands, looking for something that belongs to me. Don't see anything of yours here. She's mine. By trade. Trade's over. A pause. Then the man said, then it's war, I suppose. Colt closed the door. Neither of them slept. They burned the dog house. They didn't attack that night. That would have been too kind. They wanted fear to fester, to stretch like sinew across the bones of the house. But they sent a message the next day. The dog house was burned. Colt found it first. Blackened timbers smoldered near the barn flames, doused by dawn frost. Bristle had been gone at first light, off hunting rabbits like usual. When he returned, he howled a deep, mournful sound that curled round the porch like smoke. They didn't speak of it. There was nothing to say. Instead, they prepared. Colt nailed the windows shut 2 layers thick, reinforced the cellar trapdoor. Myra dug another pit near the fence line and filled it with broken glass chicken wire and shards of rusted iron. They lined the porch with kindling soaked in lamp oil. Every inch of land around the house grew teeth. She began wearing her pistol on her hip even in the kitchen. The sheepskin coat hung heavy off her frame, but the grip of the revolver showed beneath its hem like a whisper of violence. It gleamed sometimes in the lantern light, as if daring something to come too close. That afternoon she looked up from cleaning the rifle and asked, "You believe in fate?" Colt paused mid-motion. "No. Then why'd your dog find me luck?" She shook her head. "Not luck." Her voice dropped to something lower, thicker, the weight of understanding. Her eyes held that terrible stillness again. "I think I was meant to bleed in that dirt. Meant to be found. Meant to burn something down in return." Colt studied her. She didn't blink. "Then you will," he said. That was the second promise. The first kill. The sun was merciless when it happened, high, blinding and cold like a blade. Myra was walking the northern tree line near the paddock. Bristle at her side, both moving quiet as a dusk. That was when she saw the glint, a flicker of light off metal. A spyglass. Her breath caught. She dropped low into the snow without a sound. A man was crouched behind a split boulder. Young, thin, not yet calloused by what he'd been sent to do. A scout, a measurer. Someone sent to mark the shape of the ranch and report back. Colt had dug a blind just east of the ridge, half buried under snow, barely more than a pocket of shadow. Myra crawled to it, Bristle slinking ahead like a ghost. Colt was already there, carbine in hand. One glance was all it took. Myra whispered, "He's mine." Colt didn't argue. He handed her the rifle and nodded. The boy moved to adjust the glass again. A small twitch, nothing more. That's when Myra fired. The shot cracked through the trees, sharp and final. He folded backward, limbs loose like puppet strings cut too fast. Blood bloomed into the snow, a single violent flower. A crow rose from a nearby branch, startled, then settled again, silent. Myra exhaled. "That's one," Colt said quietly. She wiped the scope-clean eyes, never leaving the boy's still form. "No more warning," she muttered. Together they dragged the body to the old windmill at the pasture's edge, hung it by the ankles. A rag stuffed in his mouth, a bullet casing clenched in his cold hand. A message, not just to Dana, but to the land. Fire on the side of the Hoft. They came again that night. Not with guns, but with fire. It started in the dry brush behind the Hoft grease-soaked tinder, a deliberate spark. Myra saw the flames first from the window. She was already moving when she shouted barefoot on the floorboards, grabbing the water bucket without waiting for Colt. They met at the barn wall, smoke rising fast and low. She wrapped a soaked cloth around her boots and stamped at the fire like she was crushing something alive. Colt flanked the other side with a second bucket. Flames licked the beams close but not catching. The wind shifted just in time. Through the haze, Colt saw them, two riders disappearing across the ridge. Dark shapes against a darker backdrop. Testing. They're probing, Myra said, panting. Getting brave. No more of that, Colt muttered. At first light, they laid wire traps across the ravine. Sharpened horseshoe shards nailed to stakes. Trip lines strung just beneath the snow's crust. Colt reset the bear trap behind the root cellar. Myra rigged her own contraptions, cowbells strung under dead wood broken glass beneath wet hay. The sounds would carry in the night. She slept with a pistol under her hand now. Bristle paced the porch more than he rested. He knew, too. The house, once quiet, now held its breath between heartbeats. The land itself felt tighter, coiled like something that would strike. But Myra didn't tremble. She sharpened her blades. Danner walks in. He came on the 6th day. Danner didn't ride up like a soldier. He walked calm, composed, wearing a white handkerchief in one hand, like some twisted diplomat. 4 men followed, 2 with rifles, 2 with knives, greased hats, dead eyes, killers, not farmers. Colt stood on the porch, rifle, hidden but ready. Myra watched through the slats of the door. Bristle crouched beside her, breath low, and measured. Danner stopped a dozen paces from the porch and took off his hat. Afternoon march, he said, voice oiled with charm. You know why I'm here. You're trespassing, Colt said flatly. We're both men of reason. Danner smiled. I don't bargain with slavers. That smile flickered just for a moment. You keeping her here, feeding her, bedding her, I call that theft. She's mine. Paperwork says so. She's not property. Danner shrugged. World says different, then the world's wrong. Myra's grip on the rifle tightened. Her heart did not. She was beyond fear now. This was the cold watchfulness of someone who's seen the devil and memorized his face. Danner stepped closer. I'll make you a deal. 1 wagon load of cattle. $50. You let her walk back on her own feet. No fuss, no blood. No, Colt said. She's promised to me. By her blood. She's made new promises, Colt replied. Danner turned toward the house. You inside there, girl? Myra didn't answer. You think he'll die for you, he called. Think that dog'll save you twice. She stepped through the door. Rifle raised, eyes sharp as broken glass. I don't need saving, she said. Danner's smile cracked. You're playing a man's game. No, she said. I'm ending it. And then she fired. No more running. The bullet tore a clean line across Danner's cheek, not fatal, but enough to spin him off his feet and stain the snow with his blood. He landed hard, shouting a guttural sound of rage and disbelief. His men scrambled chaos, unraveling all at once. Colt stepped off the porch, calm as a coiled storm shotgun roaring. One of the knife men dropped where he stood, chest shattered, while another turned and ran. The remaining 2 opened fire, their bullets slamming into the wood siding glass and dirt. But Myra was already moving, rolling behind the barrels stacked along the porch rail, reloading without looking hands, steady like she'd done it her whole life. She returned fire with precision. One screamed, the other dove behind cover. The fight was fast, brutal. 2 minutes of fire and fury and snow exploding in plumes. When the smoke thinned, Danner and 1 man had vanished into the trees, leaving blood streaks behind. Colt caught another wounded and crawling through the snow toward the fence. He dragged him out by the collar and tied him to a post with the length of bridle rope. Myra knelt in front of the captive, breath fogging in the cold. Her eyes were sharp, voice calm. "Tell him what you saw." The man spat blood. "She's his," he muttered. "She'll always be his." Myra didn't blink. "No, I was promised," she said, raising the pistol. "But not to him. The shot was clean." The prairie fell silent again. That night they stacked the bodies on a pyre behind the barn. Colt set the wood. Myra lit it. The flames roared high into the sky, casting long shadows across the snow. They stood side by side as it burned, the light flickering off the pistol still in her hand. "He'll be back," Colt said. "He'll bring more," Myra replied. Colt nodded. "Then we finish it." She didn't tremble, didn't smile, just nodded once quiet and steady. Bristle sat nearby, ears flat, eyes on the darkness beyond the fire. The weight of waiting. The thaw came suddenly. It ripped through the frost with driving rain and southern wind that melted the snow in hours. The mud swallowed everything: hoofprints, traps, blood. Creeks began to run again, murky and fast. The prairie gave off this sour stink of old death. Colt's tools rusted if left out overnight. The barn sagged under the weight of ice melt. But Myra moved through it all with purpose, her steps sure even when the ground tried to suck her under. She sharpened her knives every morning and stood in the kitchen by lamplight at night, cleaning the rifle until its shine matched her gaze. Danner had vanished, but she knew he wasn't gone. Men like him didn't slink away from pain, they returned with worse. And silence, she'd learned, was the sharpest part of their cruelty. So she began wearing her pistol openly, the grip visible at all times like a warning. She mapped the canyon in ash on the kitchen table, marked tree lines, estimated sight lines and fire paths. "Every way in is a way out," she told Colt one morning. He nodded, still groggy from a sleepless night. "You expecting him tonight? I want him to come." She didn't say more. She didn't need to. The next few days blurred together in a rhythm that felt part war, part ritual. She buried glass jars filled with dynamite caps in shallow earth south of the barn, wired to nails driven through old cooking pans. She cleaned the same rifle 3 times in one night. Her sleeves were always rolled now, forearms roped with lean muscle movements, mechanical practiced. Colt watched her. He didn't see the girl anymore. He saw the fire she had become. Hell beneath the sky. One night she sat on the roof under a purple sky, legs dangling off the edge, boots caked in dried mud and powder. The world stretched silent around her, the kind of quiet that usually came only after screaming. Colt climbed up with 2 tin cups and sat beside her, not close, not touching, just near enough to share sky. "You believe in hell?" she asked, voice low. Colt looked at her profile. How the moonlight carved her face into something older than her years. "I've seen places like it," he said. She nodded slowly. "I think I was already there." Danner just dragged it into the daylight. Colt didn't argue, didn't offer comfort. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper creased 100 times over. He handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it. It was a telegram, brief, blunt. Just one line: "SIV else dead stop. No survivors stop." They took her stop. Myra looked up at him, eyes softening. "Who my wife? Our girl. I was gone 3 days. Came back to smoke and bones. Sheriff said raiders. They never found the men." She folded the paper and handed it back with care, like it held the weight of something sacred. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. I'm not. Not anymore. Why he looked at her, really looked. Because it led me to this. They didn't touch. They didn't speak again. But something settled in that silence like tempered steel cooling after fire. And somewhere below them, Bristle let out a quiet whine, watching the horizon even in his sleep. The horse, with no rider. The final warning didn't come in the form of a bullet or a scream. It came at dusk when the wind had died, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. A horse galloped in from the east wild-eyed and lathered with sweat, its flanks foamed and streaked with dust. There was no rider. Just a strip of torn cloth tied around its neck, faded calico, sun-bleached and stiff. Myra recognized it immediately. It was from the dress she'd been wearing the day Bristle found her in the canyon. The horse slowed near the gate nostrils, flaring eyes rolling like it had seen things no animal should have seen. Colt stepped out gun ready but didn't lift it. Myra came behind him, one hand to her chest, the other gripping the porch rail. She didn't blink, didn't look away. They're ready, she said. They want you to break, Colt said. I want them to come. There was no fear in her voice, just resolve. A cold fire. She turned and saddled her mare, checked the rifle with the care of someone counting prayer beads. She filled her coat pockets with extra rounds, tied her braid tight behind her neck. Colt said nothing. He moved with her. He strapped on both revolvers, checked the shotgun, loaded the carbine, and laid the fuses for the jars buried near the barn. They didn't speak again that night. At midnight, the cowbells rang once, then again, then stopped. The trap springs. The wind was up when they stepped outside, rustling low through the dry weeds. The moon lit the prairie like silver poured over old bone. Bristle led them to the lower ridge ears, back body taut. Nothing moved. Then faint hoofbeats. Horses careful and slow, moving along the edge of the creek bed. Myra knelt behind the gate post. Colt crouched near the barbed fencing. Together, they waited. 6, maybe more. Shadows with rifles. Shadows with purpose. Not yet, Colt whispered. They held. One of the men stepped into the line marked by white stone just barely. Myra fired. The shot cracked through the stillness and dropped him where he stood, a clean hit to the neck. Another rider rushed forward into the snare. A spring trap snapped. Bone broke. Screams followed. Gunfire burst from the shadows, wild and loud, slamming into the porch posts and door frame. Wood exploded. A window shattered behind them. Colt fired twice. Another man fell. Then came Danner's voice, smooth and smug. Come out, girl. Come out and we'll end it clean. Myra stood. I am out, she shouted. She dropped again, rolled and fired. Another scream, another body. The barn caught fire, next flames licking skyward. Danner strode through it like a revenant, eyes gleaming, pistol in one hand, whip in the other. You are mine, he growled. Myra's shot once caught his shoulder, spun him back. Colt moved behind him, slow and sure. Twice now, he said. You've aimed at what's not yours. Danner turned too late. Colt fired one round to the chest, another through the jaw. The man dropped. Myra stepped forward, smoke curling around her like a crown. You don't get to die easy, she said. Danner coughed blood. You are nothing. No, she said. You were. She placed the muzzle to his head and pulled the trigger. The dog barked once, then silence, the burn and the burial. By dawn the fire was dead. 4 bodies burned with it. The rest had fled under cover of dark, scattered like roaches in lamplight. The barn smoldered, beams blackened, smoke twisting into the sky like a final sermon. Bristle paced the porch. Myra sat on the step, Colt's coat around her shoulders. She held the pistol in both hands. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. The wind blew across the prairie like a sigh. It rustled through the sage and dusted ash across the pasture. Somewhere across the creek and ridge, the land swallowed what had happened like it had always done. No one came. No one dared. Spring arrived reluctantly. The ground thawed slow. The mud dried in streaks. Grass poked up where ash had once lain. The world indifferent moved forward, but Myra remembered. She moved through the days like someone who had survived a shipwreck on land, but never truly ashore. The scar on her hip hardened into a rope of white flesh. The bruises faded, but her eyes didn't soften. She still rose before the sun checked the perimeter patrolled with Bristle at her side. Only now sometimes she smiled, only when Colt said nothing but stood close enough to remind her she wasn't alone. The land had stopped screaming, but it hadn't forgotten. Neither had they. They lived among the scars. The forge and the silence. They didn't repair everything all at once. The barn corner stayed scorched. The shattered window remained patched with oiled paper. Bullet holes in the porch rail dotted the wood like moth bites no one dared to sand smooth. The house bore its wounds openly like old soldiers refusing a prosthetic. They lived among the damage not because they couldn't fix it, but because some scars weren't meant to be covered. They were part of the truth now. A record. One morning, without a word, Colt built her a forge. Not a large one. Just a square of stone and clay out by the edge of the yard, where the wind curled in off the plains and the morning sun hit hardest. A place for heat and hammering, and hands that needed something to shape. He didn't ask if she wanted it. He just built it. When it was done, he handed her the hammer. She took it like it was something sacred, a Bible or a sword, or maybe both. Her fingers curled around the grip slowly, purposefully. That summer she worked steel, hinges, nails, tools that bit the earth instead of her. Her shoulders changed lean and wiry, roped with new muscle. Her voice didn't grow louder, but it carried farther. Her laugh when it came was like gravel sliding in water, rough and brief but real. She spoke more often now, though never much, and always only when it mattered. She kept the forge hot through most of June. She never complained about the burn scars that came with it, naming the forgotten. Late one evening, Myra leaned on the fence line and stared out across the southern ridge. The sunset had drawn long shadows over the grass, turning it the color of rusted gold. She didn't speak at first. Colt stood beside her quiet as the dusk chewing the stem of a dead weed between his teeth. "You think folks will ever come out here again?" she asked. Maybe Colt said. "But not to take." She nodded. Good. They watched the shadows lengthen for a time. Then she said they buried girls on Dana's land. Some without names. Colt didn't look away. "We can give 'em names." Her eyes stayed on the horizon. One by one, one by one. So they did. Each Sunday they rode east to their broken patch of prairie where old fence posts leaned like tired bones. They brought simple stones and carved the names Myra chose. Names she whispered in her sleep. Names she invented from dreams and memory. Names she made up to fill the voids left by men who'd stripped them away. Grace, Lily, Jude, Fern. They weren't just names, they were resurrections. Myra planted sagebrush and wild rosemary over each one. She braided twine around the markers. She sang sometimes under her breath half-remembered hymns with no clear ending. No one came to stop them, and in time the land around those graves began to grow, again green and honest, like it had forgiven them both. The boy with the knife. The first came in late June. He was barefoot, sunburned, no more than 12. A sack slung over his shoulder and a knife too big for his hand clutched in white fingers. His eyes darted like a cornered fox. He said he'd run from a mine up north. Said he'd been whipped. Said his brother died in the shaft and no one had said a word. He didn't ask for shelter. Just wandered into the yard and stood like he didn't know what to do next. Colt watched from the porch. Myra came out, slow water bucket in hand. When she moved toward the boy, he flinched, pulled the knife but didn't point it, didn't speak. She didn't pull away. She knelt and poured water into his cupped hands, slow and steady. The boy drank like someone who hadn't in days. When he looked up at her, she asked, "You got a name?" He didn't answer. "You want one," she said. He nodded. So she gave him one. That night he slept in the barn. In the morning he saddled a mule and offered to mend fence. Colt taught him how to lash boards. Myra showed him how to set snares. He stayed. Others came after him, not many, just enough to matter. A woman with a dead eye and a baby on her hip. A man who spoke in half phrases and couldn't sleep indoors. A girl who didn't speak at all but took to carving wood like it was prayer. They came used up and hollow. They stayed. No one asked permission, and no one tried to hide. A house called shelter. They didn't plan it. No one ever said we're building a refuge. No one wrote the rules or drew lines on a map. It just happened the way wildflowers claim a graveyard. Slow, stubborn, beautiful. The forge became a shed. The shed became a hall. They hung tools along the wall-shaped nails for fence repairs, hooped barrels for collecting rain. Colt extended the chicken coop. Myra taught the girl who carved wood how to fire a pistol. The boy with the new name fixed the east fence line better than any ranch hand ever had. The prairie, once soaked in blood, began to breathe again. Colts were born, grass grew tall, the black soil drank sun. What had been soaked in death now yielded life. They never referred to it as peace. It wasn't. There were nights Myra still woke choking on old air. Colt still stared at coals like they held the past. But the ghosts didn't scream anymore. They just lingered, like distant thunder always on the edge of things. They left the bullet holes in the porch rail. They left Danner's burned brand on the barn beam. They didn't hide the past. They named it. They lived among it. Because survival wasn't about forgetting, it was about building in spite of the remembering. Stormwatch. It was late August when Colt found Myra, standing barefoot in the yard, dress soaked from the waist down. She didn't look at him when he stepped outside. She just watched the lightning walk across the southern sky, long white forks of electricity dancing silently along the edge of the world. "You ever think about what comes after?" he asked. She didn't move. "I used to," she said. "Not anymore." "Why not?" "Because this is it." She didn't mean it like a prison. She meant it like a calling. Colt stepped beside her, not close, just near enough to share sky and storm. The rain slicked her hair back, turned her into something elemental. She looked older than her years in that moment, not worn, but forged, like steel drawn from fire. "You remember when I said I didn't believe in fate," he said. She nodded. "I remember. I think I was wrong." She turned to him, lightning catching her face, painting her gold and hollow and holy all at once. "Bristle found you," Colt said. "Not by chance," she answered. They didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. The wind blew the rain sideways. Bristle barked once from beneath the porch and settled again. The sky cracked wide overhead. They stood and watched it silent, steady together. The dog who saw first Bristle died in the fall. No warning, no wound, just lay down by the chicken coop and didn't rise again. Myra found him at dawn, curled like he was sleeping, as if the job was done and the watch complete. She didn't cry. She didn't touch him, not right away. She just sat beside him, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap, the breath pulled from her chest like a vacuum had opened inside her. The morning light didn't seem to touch her. She waited, hoping maybe he'd twitch, maybe open an eye, maybe breathe. He didn't. When Colt came out, boots crunching over frost-stiffened dirt, she looked up. He saw me. First, she said. They buried him on the ridge facing west. Colt carved a headstone from pine and chiseled it with one steady hand. Bristle, guardian. Free Myra planted sage over the grave. It took root fast. They didn't speak of him after. Not often, but they felt him. When the wind changed, when the chickens stirred, when the silence stretched just long enough to make them glance toward the gate, expecting him to return. But he didn't. And yet in every stranger who found their way to the ranch, there was a bit of Bristle's path in the dirt. The trail he'd carved with loyalty and teeth. The trail that led a dying girl to the one man who would not leave her behind. Years passed. Myra stopped telling the story of the canyon, but others told it for her. When someone asked about the girl who'd survived the dust and burned a man's skull with her stare, they were told a simple thing. She lives where no man raises a hand uninvited, where girls carry knives and dogs don't bark without reason, where a cowboy's dog once found a girl in the dirt and knew she was the one they had been waiting for. Here is the epilogue to conclude your long-form Western story. It carries the same emotional weight, cinematic tone, and quiet finality as the rest of the narrative. Epilogue: the land that waited for her. By the time autumn gold turned to frost again, the ranch had settled into something that felt like permanence. Not peace, never peace, but rhythm, purpose. A map drawn, not in roads, but in memory, in sweat and scars that no longer bled. They never put up a sign, but people still found it. Some came broken, like glass dulled by riverbeds. Some came silent, trailing histories that wouldn't speak aloud. All of them were met with the same unspoken creed: you can stay if you work, if you listen, if you never raise your hand in anger. No one asked what had happened there, but they could feel it. In the way the barn door stuck in the cold, in the bullet-pocked porch rail never replaced, in the forge where a woman with rope-hard hands could twist metal into tools sharp enough to slice memory, and in the grave of the ridge where wild sage grew thick over a pine stone marked simply Bristle, guardian, free. They never saw Colt leave, but they say he walked off one day at sunrise, rifle strapped to his back, boots clean, coat mended. No one followed. No one asked why. He left behind a single slip of paper tacked to the forge door. 3 words. Myra never showed it to anyone, but she kept it in her coat. Years passed. They say she taught girls how to aim steady, taught boys how to listen more than talk, taught anyone who stayed long enough how to hear the land and not try to own it. And when people asked where she came from, the answer never changed. She was found by a dog, and that was enough. Because in the places where the world forgets people like her, She built something no one could take, a place where nothing was owned, only protected, and where the wind still carried her name, not like a warning, but like a promise